The first thing I saw when I stepped out of my garage that Tuesday morning in February was Linda Pennington standing beside my propane tank with a clipboard and a look that could curdle milk. I had just moved into the Riverside Meadows community in Medford, Oregon, 6 months ago, inheriting the property from my uncle who had passed away unexpectedly. The house itself was beautiful, a 2-story craftsman-style home built in 1998 with a massive backyard that bordered the community's shared green space. My name is Quincy, and at 34 years old, I thought I had finally found the perfect place to settle down after years of apartment living in Portland. "Can I help you?" I called out, walking across the frost-covered lawn toward her. The February morning was bitter cold, and I could see my breath forming clouds in the air. Linda turned to face me with that particular expression that HOA board presidents seem to perfect over years of practice. She was maybe 55, with short blonde hair styled in that aggressive soccer mom cut, wearing a puffy purple vest over a turtleneck despite the cold. "Mr. Quincy, I'm glad I caught you. We need to discuss this." She gestured at my propane tank with her pen like it was a dead raccoon. "What about it?" I asked, genuinely confused. The tank had been there since my uncle installed the house's heating system back in 2003. It was a large commercial-grade tank, probably 500 gallons, painted white and sitting on a concrete pad behind some decorative shrubs. "It's a violation of our community guidelines, Section 7, Subsection 3. No visible propane tanks allowed on residential properties. They're unsightly and decrease property values." She flipped through her clipboard papers as if reading from sacred texts. I blinked at her. "Linda, that tank has been there for over 20 years. My uncle lived here from the day this house was built. Your uncle had a grandfather clause provision that expired upon transfer of property ownership. As the new owner, you're subject to current regulations." She pulled out a printed notice and held it toward me. "You have 30 days to remove it or face daily fines of $200. I took the paper from her, scanning the official-looking document with the Riverside Meadows HOA letterhead. "This is ridiculous. That tank supplies all my heating. I can't just remove it. You'll need to convert to electric heating or install an underground tank, which would be acceptable per our guidelines. The choice is yours, but the tank must go." Linda's smile was pure synthetic politeness. "You have any idea how much that would cost?" I felt my jaw tightening. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars for a heating system replacement or underground tank installation. That's not the HOA's concern. We have standards to maintain. Good day, Mr. Quincy." She turned on her heel and walked away, her boots crunching on the frozen grass. I stood there holding the notice, watching my breath fog in the cold air, and felt a migraine starting behind my eyes. This was exactly the kind of petty nonsense I had heard about HOAs but never experienced personally. My apartment complex had been managed by a company that mostly left everyone alone as long as rent was paid. This was different. This was personal power on the smallest possible scale, and Linda Pennington wielded it like a sword. Inside my house, I made coffee and called my buddy Mike, who worked in construction and knew about these things. He laughed when I told him about Linda's visit. "Man, those HOA types are something else," he said. "But seriously, she's not wrong about the cost. Converting to electric heat would run you at least 20 grand, probably more with your square footage. Underground propane installation is cheaper, but still looking at 8 to 10,000 easy. I don't have that kind of money just lying around, Mike. I used most of my savings on closing costs and repairs when I inherited this place. Can you fight it? Check your HOA bylaws. I spent the rest of that day digging through the massive binder of HOA documents my uncle's attorney had given me during the estate settlement. Most of it was mind-numbingly boring stuff about lawn maintenance schedules and approved exterior paint colors. But buried in Section 7, there it was. The propane tank restriction, implemented in 2019, 4 years ago. And sure enough, existing tanks were grandfathered in until property transfer. The next morning, I decided to do some investigating. My uncle had been a meticulous record keeper, and his home office was filled with filing cabinets I had not fully gone through yet. In the third drawer down, I found folders labeled by year going back to 2003. I pulled out 2003 and started reading. That is when things got interesting. My uncle, Harold Sr., had been on the original HOA board when Riverside Meadows was first developed. According to meeting minutes from August 2003, there had been a discussion about the community's emergency backup heating system. The developer had originally planned to install electric heating in the community center, which served as the neighborhood's emergency shelter during severe weather events. Oregon winters could be brutal, and Medford occasionally got hit with ice storms that knocked out power for days. But electric heating would not work during power outages, which was the entire point of an emergency shelter. According to the minutes, my uncle had proposed a solution. He would install an oversized propane system at his property with a secondary line running underground to the community center, about 200 yards away. The HOA would cover half the installation cost, and in exchange, my uncle would maintain the system and ensure adequate propane supply. The community center's backup heating would tap into his tank. I sat back in my uncle's office chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. If I was reading this correctly, Linda Pennington had just ordered me to remove the very tank that supplied emergency heat to the community center. The same community center that was mentioned in the HOA bylaws as a mandatory amenity. I kept digging. More meeting minutes, installation invoices, a signed agreement between my uncle and the HOA. It was all there, documented in excruciating detail. The propane line ran from my tank, underground through the green space, directly to the community center's backup heating system. My uncle had been quietly refilling that tank twice a year for over 20 years, and the HOA had been paying him a stipend of $100 monthly to cover the cost and maintenance. Except the payments had stopped about 3 years ago, right around the time Linda Pennington had taken over as HOA president. I found letters from my uncle questioning the stopped payments, and snippy responses from Linda saying the agreement was under review and that the community center had adequate heating provisions. I called the HOA management office that afternoon and asked to speak with Linda. The receptionist, a nervous-sounding woman named Paula, said Linda was in a board meeting but could call me back. Actually, I will come to the office. Is the board meeting open to residents? I asked. Well, yes, but you need to request speaking time in advance. I will take my chances. What time does the meeting end? I arrived at the community center at 4:30 that afternoon. The building was a nice facility, probably about 3,000 square feet, with a main room that could hold maybe 100 people, a kitchen, and some smaller meeting rooms. I had only been inside once, briefly, when I first moved in. The board meeting was wrapping up as I walked into the main room. Linda sat at a table facing rows of chairs, most of them empty. 3 other board members sat with her, looking equally middle-aged and bureaucratic, 2 men and a woman. I recognized one of the men as Thomas, my next-door neighbor. Mr. Quincy, Linda said when she noticed me. This is unexpected. As I mentioned yesterday, you have 30 days to comply with the notice. I am not here about compliance, I said, walking down the center aisle. I am here about this. I placed the folder of documents on the table in front of her. Specifically, the 2003 agreement between my uncle and the HOA regarding the propane system. Linda's face went through several interesting color changes. The other board members leaned in to look at the papers. "What agreement?" asked the woman, whose nameplate read Susan Morris, Treasurer. "The agreement," I said clearly. "That establishes the propane tank you want me to remove as the primary supply for this building's emergency backup heating system. The tank that my uncle installed 22 years ago, partially funded by HOA dues, specifically to provide emergency heat during power outages." Thomas, my neighbor, picked up one of the meeting minutes and started reading. His eyebrows climbed steadily higher. "Linda, did you know about this?" "That agreement is outdated and irrelevant," Linda said quickly, but her voice had lost its confidence. "The community center has electric heating, which does not work during power outages," I pointed out, "which is the entire point of a backup system. According to the bylaws, this facility is designated as an emergency shelter. State law actually requires HOAs with designated emergency shelters to maintain functional backup heating in regions with freezing winter temperatures." I looked it up. Oregon Revised Statutes, Section 94.630. I may have been exaggerating slightly about looking up the specific statute, but the general principle was solid, and none of them seemed eager to challenge me on it. The fourth board member, an older man whose nameplate said Robert Chen, Secretary, was reading through the installation invoices. "This shows the HOA paid $12,000 toward the propane system installation. That's a significant investment. An investment we stopped maintaining," I added. "According to these documents, the HOA was supposed to pay my uncle a monthly stipend for propane refills and system maintenance. Those payments stopped in 2023. But I am guessing my uncle kept filling the tank anyway, because that is the kind of person he was." Linda's face was now fully red. "This is absurd. We have adequate heating." "Then you would not mind if I remove the tank as you demanded?" I asked pleasantly. "I will call a propane company tomorrow. They can have it out by next week." "Of course, that means disconnecting the line to this building, but since you say you have adequate heating, that should not be a problem." "Now wait just a minute," Thomas said, looking alarmed. "We can't lose the backup heating. We had that ice storm last year that knocked out power for 3 days. We had 15 families sheltering here. Then perhaps the board should reconsider the removal notice," I suggested. Linda looked like she wanted to argue, but Susan was already shaking her head. "Linda, if what Mr. Quincy is saying is accurate and these documents seem to support it, we can't force him to remove a system that we're dependent on. That's not just foolish, it's potentially illegal." "The tank is unsightly," Linda insisted, but her voice was weak now. "It's behind shrubs and barely visible from the street," Robert pointed out. "I drive past Mr. Quincy's house twice a day and never noticed it until you mentioned it at last month's meeting." "Last month?" I asked. "So this has been planned for a while." Linda raised the issue of visible propane tanks as part of a comprehensive aesthetic review, Susan explained, sounding apologetic. "Several properties were flagged, but yours was the only one with an actual tank. The others were just old, empty tanks left by previous owners." I looked at Linda. She would not meet my eyes. Something else was going on here, but I could not figure out what. "I propose we table the removal notice pending a full review of the 2003 agreement," Thomas said. "All in favor." 3 hands went up immediately. Linda stayed down, but she was outvoted. "Motion carries," Robert said, making a note. "Mr. Quincy, Please leave these documents with us so we can make copies for our files. We'll return the originals to you within the week." I agreed and left the community center feeling victorious but unsettled. Linda Pennington had come after my propane tank knowing, or at least potentially knowing, that it supplied the community center's backup heating. Why? What did she have to gain? The answer came 3 days later in the form of a knock on my door at 8 in the morning. I opened it to find a man in his early 30s wearing a polo shirt with a company logo that read Warm Home Electric Solutions. "Harold Quincy?" he asked. "That is me. I'm Brad Chen with Warm Home. I had an appointment scheduled to give you a quote on converting your heating system from propane to electric. Linda Pennington from your HOA set it up." I stared at him. "She did what?" Brad looked uncomfortable. "She called our office 2 weeks ago and said you were interested in converting to electric heat. She scheduled this appointment. Is this a bad time?" "No, come in," I said, my mind racing. "Let's talk." Over coffee, Brad explained that Linda had contacted his company claiming several residents in Riverside Meadows were interested in converting to electric heating as part of a community-wide energy efficiency initiative. She had specifically mentioned my property as the first conversion, promising Warm Home that it would be a showcase for additional business in the neighborhood. "How much commission does your company pay for referrals?" I asked. Brad shifted uncomfortably. "We have a referral program. 10% of the total project cost goes to whoever brings us the client." "And my conversion would cost how much?" "For a house your size, probably $25,000 to $30,000. It's a complete system replacement." So Linda stood to make $2,000 to $3,000 off forcing me to replace my heating system. Probably more if she managed to convince other residents to convert. I thanked Brad for his time and sent him on his way, then immediately called Thomas next door. "We need to talk about Linda," I said when he answered. Thomas came over within 10 minutes. He was a retired accountant, maybe 60 years old, with gray hair and the careful demeanor of someone who had spent his career finding problems in spreadsheets. I told him about Brad's visit and Linda's referral arrangement. Thomas's face went dark. "That's a conflict of interest. Board members can't profit from HOA decisions. It's in the bylaws, and I'm pretty sure it's illegal under Oregon law." "Can you prove it?" "If she's been taking referral fees, there will be a paper trail. Give me a few days. I know some people." True to his word, Thomas called me 4 days later. "We need to have an emergency board meeting, tonight if possible. Can you be there?" "What did you find?" "Just come." 7 o'clock. The community center meeting room was tense that evening. All 4 board members were there, plus me, and a woman I did not recognize who Thomas introduced as Margaret Fletcher, an attorney specializing in HOA law. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Thomas began. "Over the past few days, I've been conducting an audit of some HOA financial decisions made over the past 3 years since Linda became president. What I found is concerning enough that I felt we needed legal counsel present." Linda's face had gone pale. "This is highly irregular. You can't just bring an attorney to a board meeting without proper notice. Actually, any board member can request legal counsel when potential violations are discovered," Margaret said calmly. "And from what Mr. Thomas has shown me, there are several potential violations to discuss." Thomas opened a folder and began pulling out documents. Over the past 3 years, Linda has issued violation notices to 17 different property owners for various infractions: lawn maintenance, exterior modifications, visible equipment, and other issues. In 15 of those 17 cases, Linda also contacted service companies on behalf of the homeowners, arranging consultations or quotes. "I was being helpful," Linda protested, "connecting residents with reputable companies." Companies that paid you referral fees, Thomas continued. I contacted 6 of these companies directly. 4 confirmed they have referral arrangements with you. The other 2 wouldn't confirm or deny, but they didn't deny it either. Based on the project costs I was able to verify, you've made approximately $18,000 in referral fees over 3 years. The room went silent. Susan looked horrified. Robert looked angry. That's a serious allegation, Linda said, but her voice wavered. It's also documented, Thomas replied. I have emails from your personal account to these companies discussing referral arrangements. One company was kind enough to provide their payment records after I explained that I was conducting an HOA audit. You're listed as receiving payments totaling $4,200 from them alone. Margaret cleared her throat. Under Oregon law, HOA board members are fiduciaries with a duty of loyalty to the association and its members. Profiting personally from board decisions is a breach of fiduciary duty. It's also potentially fraud if violation notices were issued in bad faith to generate referral income. Linda stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. I resign from the board effective immediately. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Mrs. Pennington, Margaret said sharply, before you leave, you should know that resignation doesn't protect you from potential legal action. The HOA may choose to pursue civil remedies to recover the funds you obtained through conflicts of interest. Additionally, if any homeowners paid for unnecessary work based on false or exaggerated violation notices, they may have individual claims against you. Linda stopped at the door but didn't turn around. Those violation notices were legitimate. Were they? I asked, speaking for the first time. Was my propane tank really a violation? Or was it just an opportunity for you to make $3,000 off forcing me to replace my heating system? A heating system that, by the way, supplies emergency backup heat to this building, which you conveniently failed to mention. Linda left without answering, the door slamming behind her. The remaining board members sat in stunned silence for a moment before Susan spoke. What do we do now? Margaret pulled out a legal pad. First, the board should vote to formally accept Mrs. Pennington's resignation. Second, you need to conduct a comprehensive review of all violation notices issued during her tenure to determine which were legitimate and which might have been pretextual. Third, you should send a letter to all affected homeowners informing them of the situation and their potential right to seek reimbursement. Fourth, the HOA should strongly consider filing a civil suit to recover the referral fees, which legally belong to the association, not to Mrs. Pennington personally. What about criminal charges? Robert asked. That would be up to the district attorney's office. You could file a complaint with the Medford Police Department. Whether they pursue charges would depend on whether they believe there's sufficient evidence of fraud. Thomas looked at me. Harold, I'm sorry you got caught up in this. Obviously, the removal notice for your propane tank is void. In fact, given the circumstances, I think the board should reinstate the monthly stipend we were paying your uncle for maintaining the backup heating system. And back pay the 3 years of missed payments, Susan added. That's the right thing to do. I nodded slowly. I appreciate that. But honestly, I'm more concerned about whether Linda pulled this with other people who couldn't fight back. How many people in this community paid for expensive repairs or modifications they didn't actually need? That question hung in the air as the meeting wound down. Margaret promised to draft the necessary letters and legal documents. Thomas was appointed interim president until a special election could be held. And I went home feeling like I had won a battle, but was only starting to see the full scope of the war. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved fast. The board sent letters to all 17 homeowners who had received violation notices during Linda's tenure. 8 of them responded saying they had paid for work they now suspected was unnecessary. The amounts ranged from a few $100s for lawn care services to over $15,000 for one family who had replaced their entire fence based on a structural integrity claim that turned out to be exaggerated. Thomas coordinated with Margaret to compile evidence. I spent hours going through my uncle's old files, finding more documentation about the propane system agreement, and proving that Linda must have known about it before issuing my violation notice. The original agreement was on file with the HOA management company, and Linda had requested copies of historical documents just 2 months before targeting my property. On a rainy Tuesday morning in early March, 2 detectives from the Medford Police Department showed up at Linda's house, 3 doors down from mine on Riverside Drive. I watched from my window as they spent 90 minutes inside, then left carrying several boxes. Linda emerged an hour later, got in her car, and drove away. I didn't see her return. Thomas called me that afternoon. The police are investigating. Apparently, what Linda did crosses the line from civil misconduct into criminal fraud. Creating false violation notices to generate income constitutes fraud under Oregon law. The detective told me they're looking at multiple counts. How is everyone else taking it? Mixed reactions. Some people are angry. Some are embarrassed they didn't catch it sooner. A few are defending Linda, saying we're overreacting. He sighed. It's divided the community. He was not kidding. Over the next few days, I saw the division firsthand. Some neighbors stopped to chat when they saw me outside, thanking me for uncovering the fraud. Others glared at me like I had personally destroyed the neighborhood. A woman I had never met left a note on my door saying I should be ashamed for attacking a dedicated volunteer. The complexity of the situation became clearer at the next HOA meeting, which drew the largest crowd in the community's history. The main room was packed with at least 80 residents, far more than the building was designed to hold. Emotions ran high. Thomas called the meeting to order and immediately addressed the situation. I know many of you have questions about recent events. I'll do my best to provide answers, but please understand some information is part of an ongoing investigation and can't be shared yet. Is it true Linda made thousands of dollars off fake violation notices? A man in the back shouted. The police investigation will determine what's accurate, Thomas said carefully. What I can tell you is that the board has documented evidence of Linda receiving referral fees from companies she recommended to homeowners after issuing violation notices. We've turned that evidence over to the police and to our attorney. Linda Pennington has served this community for 15 years, an older woman near the front said, standing up. Her voice shook with emotion. She's organized our summer barbecues, managed our landscaping contracts, and kept this neighborhood beautiful. I can't believe you're all turning on her over some technical violation of policies that nobody reads anyway. Mrs. Patterson, I understand your loyalty, Thomas replied. Linda did do good work in many areas, but the issue here isn't technical. If Linda issued violation notices in bad faith to generate personal income, that's fraud. It doesn't matter how many barbecues she organized. Board members can't profit from their positions. What about Harold's propane tank? Someone else called out. Was that violation legitimate or not? Thomas gestured to me. Harold, you want to address that? I stood up, feeling dozens of eyes on me. The tank Linda wanted removed has been supplying emergency backup heat to this community center for 22 years. There's a signed agreement between my uncle and the original HOA board documenting this arrangement. Linda knew about the agreement before she issued the violation notice, but she issued it anyway. The company she referred me to would have paid her a referral fee of $3,000 if I had converted to electric heat. But the tank is unsightly, Mrs. Patterson insisted. The HOA has standards. The tank is behind shrubs and barely visible, I countered. And more importantly, if I had removed it, this building would have lost its emergency heating. We're required by Oregon law to maintain functional backup heating if we designate this as an emergency shelter, which we do. Linda was willing to compromise the safety of this community to make $3,000. That statement created a wave of murmuring through the crowd. I saw some faces shift from defensive to thoughtful. A younger woman I recognized as my neighbor 2 streets over stood up. I received a violation notice last year about my deck. Linda said the boards were rotting and it was a safety hazard. She gave me the number for a contractor who quoted me $8,000 for a complete rebuild. I couldn't afford it, so I had my brother-in-law, who's a contractor, come look at it. He said the deck was fine, maybe needed a coat of stain but no structural work. I thought Linda was just being overly cautious. Now I'm wondering if she would have gotten a referral fee from that $8,000 job. Did you file a complaint with the board about the inaccurate violation notice? Thomas asked. No, I just ignored it after my brother-in-law checked the deck. Eventually the notice expired and I never heard about it again. Thomas made a note. I'd like to talk to you after the meeting. Your experience might be relevant to the investigation. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, with various residents sharing similar stories. A man whose roof Linda had claimed was in violation of color standards. A family whose tree she said was diseased and needed removal. A couple whose mailbox she declared non-compliant. In each case, Linda had recommended a specific company, and in most cases, second opinions had contradicted her claims. By the end of the meeting, even Mrs. Patterson looked troubled. The evidence of a pattern was overwhelming. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday morning in late March, Linda Pennington was arrested. The charges included fraud, theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. According to the police report that was eventually made public, the investigation had uncovered over $32,000 in referral fees Linda had received over 4 years, not just 3. She had been running the scheme even longer than Thomas had initially discovered. The local newspaper, the Mail Tribune, ran a story about it. HOA president arrested in fraud scheme was the headline. The article detailed how Linda had systematically issued questionable violation notices, pressured homeowners into making unnecessary repairs, and collected referral fees from the companies she recommended. My case was mentioned specifically because of the propane tank's connection to the community center's backup heating. The day the article came out, I got a call from my insurance company. Apparently, several other Riverside Meadows residents had also filed complaints about Linda, and the HOA's insurance carrier was investigating potential claims. They wanted documentation of the propane system agreement and any costs I had incurred related to Linda's actions. I hadn't really thought about costs. I had spent hours going through my uncle's files, time dealing with the HOA meetings and stress, but no direct financial losses since I had not complied with the removal notice. Still, I provided the insurance company with all the documentation they requested. A week later, the HOA's attorney, Margaret Fletcher, called me directly. Mr. Quincy, I wanted to update you on a few things. First, the board has voted unanimously to reinstate the monthly stipend for the propane system. It's $100 a month and will back pay you for the 3 years of missed payments plus interest. That's $3,800. I appreciate that, I said. But you know I didn't do this for money, right? I know. But it's the right thing to do, and frankly, the HOA was in breach of contract by stopping those payments. Second, the board wants to offer you a position. We need a new president and several members have suggested you for the role. That caught me off guard. I've only lived here 6 months. Which means you have fresh eyes and no history of going along with bad practices. You also demonstrated integrity and thoroughness in uncovering this situation. The community needs that right now. I thought about it for a moment. Being HOA president sounded like a nightmare of petty complaints and bureaucratic nonsense. But I also thought about my uncle, who had served on the original board and had created the propane system specifically to help the community. Maybe I owed it to his memory to help fix what had broken. Let me think about it, I told Margaret. I need a few days. Take a week. We're holding elections next month anyway. If you decide to run, I think you would win easily. I talked to Thomas about it the next day over coffee in his kitchen. His wife, a pleasant woman named Dorothy, made cookies while we discussed the situation. The HOA presidency is a lot of work, Thomas admitted. I'm doing it now as interim president and it's easily 15 to 20 hours a week, but most of that is cleaning up Linda's mess. Once things stabilize, it's more manageable, maybe 5 to 10 hours a week. What does the president actually do? Attend monthly board meetings, review and approve major expenses, handle resident complaints that can't be resolved at lower levels, coordinate with the management company, plan community events. It's not glamorous, but it's important. An HOA can either be a force that makes a neighborhood better or a petty tyranny that makes everyone miserable. We've seen both extremes. I munched on a cookie, thinking, if I do this, I want to make some changes. No more violation notices without independent verification. No more board members recommending specific companies. Clear conflict of interest policies. All good ideas. You should write them up as proposals. If you run for president, make that your platform. That evening, I sat in my uncle's office, surrounded by his carefully organized files, and thought about what he would have wanted. He had been part of building this community, creating systems that worked, helping neighbors. Linda had corrupted that vision for personal profit. Someone needed to fix it. I called Margaret the next morning. I will run for president. Let's do this right. The election was scheduled for mid-April, giving me about 3 weeks to campaign. Except campaigning in an HOA election is strange. There is no door knocking, no TV ads, no rallies. Mostly it's attending community events, talking to neighbors, and hoping people show up to vote. I created a simple platform based on transparency, accountability, and community benefit. I proposed requiring all violation notices to be reviewed by at least 2 board members before being issued. I suggested implementing a conflict of interest policy that prohibited board members from receiving any financial benefit related to their HOA duties. I recommended bringing back community events that had been discontinued, like the summer barbecue series and a fall festival. My opponent was a woman named Sharon Mitchell, who had lived in Riverside Meadows for 12 years and had served on various HOA committees. She was pleasant enough, but represented the status quo. Her platform was basically keep things stable and move past the unpleasantness. The debate, held in the community center 2 weeks before the election, was civil but showed clear differences. Sharon argued that we should not overreact to one bad board member by implementing excessive oversight. I argued that Linda had gotten away with fraud for years precisely because there was not enough oversight. How do we know you won't abuse the position like Linda did? Someone asked me during the question period. You don't, I answered honestly. That's why we need structural safeguards, not just trust in individuals. No one should have the power Linda had. No board member should be able to issue violation notices unilaterally or benefit financially from board decisions. These should be policies, not just promises. The question that clinched it came from Mrs. Patterson, the older woman who had defended Linda at the first meeting. "Mr. Quincy, you discovered your propane tank supplied our emergency heating. You could have used that as leverage, demanding the HOA pay you more money or threatening to disconnect the system. Why didn't you?" I thought about that. Because that's not what my uncle would have done. He installed that system to help the community, not to profit from it. I'm not trying to profit either. I just want to live here peacefully and make sure other people can do the same without worrying about being scammed by the people who are supposed to be serving them. Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly and sat down. After the debate, she came up to me. "You have my vote, young man. Linda fooled me, and I'm ashamed of that. We need someone with integrity." Election day was a Saturday in late April. Voting took place at the community center from 9 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. I voted at 10, casting my ballot in a somewhat surreal moment of voting for myself, then went home to do yard work and try not to think about it. Thomas called me at 6 that evening. "Harold, you won. It wasn't even close. 217 votes to 93. "Congratulations, Mr. President." I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. "When do I start?" "Board meeting next Tuesday to make it official. Then you're in charge." The following Tuesday, I was sworn in as HOA president of Riverside Meadows. The oath was administered by Margaret Fletcher and witnessed by the other board members and about 20 residents who showed up. It felt oddly formal for something that would mostly involve arguing about lawn maintenance and community center bookings. My first action as president was to propose the reforms I had campaigned on. The board voted unanimously to adopt new policies requiring dual approval for violation notices, prohibiting board members from receiving financial benefits related to HOA business, and mandating annual external audits of HOA finances. We also voted to send letters to all homeowners who had paid for work based on Linda's violation notices, informing them of their potential right to seek reimbursement through the HOA's insurance or directly from Linda. My second action was to review the propane system agreement and formalize it with updated documentation. We hired an inspector to verify the system was functioning properly and met current safety codes. Everything checked out. The inspector actually complimented the installation, saying it was one of the better backup heating systems he had seen in a residential setting. "Your uncle knew what he was doing," the inspector told me. "This system could keep the community center heated for a week straight if needed." That's serious capacity. Over the next few months, I settled into the role. It was more work than I had expected, but also more rewarding. When a young family moved into the neighborhood and needed help understanding the HOA rules, I was able to walk them through everything clearly and answer their questions. When a dispute arose between neighbors about a fence line, I helped mediate a solution. When the landscaping company tried to increase their rates by 30%, I negotiated them down to 10% by showing them comparable bids. The criminal case against Linda moved slowly through the system, as criminal cases do. She was initially released on bail but prohibited from serving in any HOA capacity. Her attorney tried to argue that she had not committed fraud, that the violation notices were legitimate, and the referral fees were separate business activities. The prosecutor disagreed, pointing out that Linda had never disclosed the referral arrangements and had issued violation notices to homeowners, who she then steered toward companies that paid her. In late August, 5 months after her arrest, Linda accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 3 counts of fraud and agreed to pay restitution totaling $32,000, plus penalties and court costs. She received a suspended sentence of 3 years, meaning she would not go to prison as long as she stayed out of trouble and paid the restitution. She also agreed to never serve on an HOA board again, anywhere. The restitution was divided among the homeowners who had been victims of her scheme. I was not included since I had not paid for any unnecessary work, but 17 other families received checks ranging from a few hundred to several $1,000s. It did not fully compensate everyone for what they had lost, but it was something. The civil case was still ongoing. The HOA had filed suit against Linda to recover attorney fees and other costs associated with investigating and remediating her fraud. That case would probably drag on for years. For me, life slowly returned to normal. The propane tank behind my house, the source of all this trouble, continued doing its job quietly and efficiently. I had it serviced in June, and the technician said it was in excellent condition. My uncle had maintained it well, and I intended to continue that tradition. In September, we held the community barbecue that Linda used to organize, but that had been canceled the previous 2 years. I grilled burgers and hot dogs while Thomas managed the music, and Dorothy coordinated the dessert table. Over 100 residents showed up, including several who thanked me for cleaning up the HOA mess. Mrs. Patterson brought potato salad and apologized again for defending Linda. "I just couldn't believe someone I trusted would do something like that," she said. "I should have listened to you sooner." "You were being loyal to a friend," I replied. "That's not a bad quality. Linda was the one who betrayed that loyalty, not you." On a cool evening in early October, I sat on my back deck with a beer, looking at the propane tank that had started this whole adventure. The white paint gleamed in the fading sunlight, and I could see the underground line access panel that connected to the community center. Such a simple piece of infrastructure, but it had exposed corruption, changed community leadership, and taught me a lot about both the best and worst of human nature. My phone rang. It was Thomas. "Hey Harold, quick question. We've got a request from a homeowner to install solar panels. According to the bylaws, we need to approve any major exterior modifications. What's your take?" I smiled. This was what HOA leadership should be. Reasonable questions, practical decisions, helping people improve their homes while maintaining community standards. "Is it visible from the street?" "Just barely. They're on the back slope of the roof." "Then I don't see a problem, but let's get the architectural committee to review it and make sure it meets any relevant codes. If they approve, I'll sign off." "Sounds good. See you at the board meeting Thursday." I hung up and took another sip of beer. The community center lights came on automatically as darkness fell. I thought about those 3 days during last year's ice storm when 15 families had sheltered there, kept warm by propane heat flowing from my uncle's tank. That was what communities were supposed to do: take care of each other. Build systems that worked for everyone, not just for personal profit. Linda had forgotten that, or maybe she had never really understood it. She had seen the HOA as a source of power and income rather than a responsibility and trust. That distinction made all the difference. In November, we held our fall festival for the first time in 4 years. Kids bobbed for apples while parents drank cider and talked about the upcoming holidays. The community center was decorated with hay bales and pumpkins. It felt like what a neighborhood should be. During a quiet moment, I stepped outside to check on something. The evening was cold, and I could see my breath. I walked around to the side of the community center where the propane line connection was located. The system was running, providing supplemental heat to keep the building comfortable for the festival. Everything working exactly as my uncle had designed it. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to find Sharon Mitchell, my former election opponent. She had joined the architectural committee and was doing good work. "Making sure everything is running?" she asked. "Just checking. Force of habit." "You know, I voted against you," Sharon said with a slight smile. "I thought you were too new, too reactive to the Linda situation. I was wrong. You've been a good president." "Thanks. That means a lot. Your uncle would be proud. He was a good man." I remember when he first proposed this propane system. Some people thought it was overkill, that we would never need it. But he insisted, said we had a responsibility to provide emergency shelter if we were going to call this building a community center. He was right. We stood there in the cold for a moment, listening to the sounds of the festival inside. Children laughing, music playing, people talking. Community in action. "Come on," Sharon said. "Let's get back inside before we freeze." I followed her back to the warmth and light. Through the windows, I could see my neighbors, my community, the people I had taken responsibility for when I accepted the HOA presidency. It was a good view. The propane tank behind my house continued supplying heat through that winter and into the next. I had it serviced regularly, kept it filled, and maintained the system exactly as my uncle had done. The HOA paid me the monthly stipend, and I used that money to cover the propane costs with a bit left over. But more than that, the tank had become a symbol for me. A reminder that the best community systems are built on service, not profit, on foresight, not exploitation, on trust, not power. Linda had tried to destroy that for a few $1,000s in referral fees. She had failed. Riverside Meadows was not perfect. We still had disputes about noise complaints and parking issues and tree trimming schedules. But we were working through them together, with transparency and fairness. The HOA was functioning the way it was supposed to, as a tool for community benefit rather than individual enrichment. On a warm spring evening the following May, more than a year after Linda's arrest, I got a call from Margaret Fletcher. "Harold, I wanted to let you know the civil case settled. Linda's insurance agreed to pay the HOA's attorney fees and investigation costs. We're getting about $48,000, which will cover everything and leave some left over for reserves." That's good news. It's closure. This whole mess is finally resolved. You did good work here, Harold. You could have just ignored Linda's violation notice, let the system disconnect, and walked away. Instead, you stood up and exposed a systemic problem. That takes courage. After we hung up, I walked outside. The evening was beautiful, the kind of perfect spring weather that makes you remember why you live in Oregon. The trees were blooming, the grass was green, and neighbors were out walking dogs and pushing strollers. I walked around to my backyard and looked at the propane tank. Still there, still working, still serving its purpose. The shrubs had grown a bit, making it even less visible than before. You would never know, looking at it, the role it had played in exposing corruption and reforming a community organization. But I knew. Every time I saw it, I was reminded of my uncle's foresight and generosity. He had built something that lasted, something that served others, something worth protecting. And in protecting it, I had discovered my own capacity for leadership and community service. The HOA notice Linda had left on my door that cold February morning was framed now, hanging in my office. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Violation notice. Propane tank must be removed. Such a simple, bureaucratic document, such profound consequences. I heard my phone buzz with a text from Thomas. "Board meeting Thursday. Agenda is light. Should be quick. I texted back a thumbs up and went inside to start dinner. Life in Riverside Meadows continued, quieter now, steadier, better. The propane tank hummed softly in the background, doing its job, keeping the community safe, exactly as intended. That was all any of us could hope to do. Our jobs, our best, for the good of others. Linda had forgotten that lesson. I was determined never to make the same mistake. As I cooked dinner that evening, I thought about the journey from that confrontational February morning to this peaceful May evening. The investigation, the meetings, the election, the reforms, the resolution. It had been exhausting and stressful and sometimes infuriating. But it had also been necessary and ultimately successful. The community was stronger now. We had learned painful lessons about oversight and accountability. We had seen how easily power could be abused and how important it was to maintain checks and balances. We had discovered that standing up to corruption, even small-scale HOA corruption, was worth the effort. And perhaps most importantly, we had proven that a community could face a crisis, confront uncomfortable truths, and come out better on the other side. Not everyone had been happy about it. Some people still thought we had overreacted, that Linda's actions did not warrant the response they received. But those voices had grown quieter as the evidence mounted and the full scope of her scheme became clear. The 17 families who received restitution checks understood. The residents who could now trust that HOA violation notices were legitimate understood. The future homeowners who would join Riverside Meadows and benefit from our reformed policies would understand, even if they never knew the full story. I finished cooking and sat down to eat, looking out my window at the neighborhood I now helped lead. The propane tank was visible from my kitchen window if you knew where to look. Most people did not notice it, but it was there, quietly essential, serving its purpose. Just like good leadership should be. Quiet, essential, serving a purpose beyond oneself. That was the lesson my uncle had left me, even though I had not recognized it at first. Not just a house and a propane tank, but an example of how to be part of a community. How to contribute rather than extract. How to serve rather than exploit. Linda Pennington had failed to learn that lesson despite 15 years in HOA leadership. I was determined to honor it in whatever time I served. And when my term ended, I hoped to pass the same ethic on to whoever came next. The sun set over Riverside Meadows that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Lights came on in houses up and down the street. The community center glowed in the distance, warm and welcoming, ready to serve as emergency shelter if needed, heated by the propane system my uncle had installed 22 years ago. Everything connected. Everything mattered. Everything had consequences, good or bad, depending on the choices people made. I chose to serve. Linda had chosen to exploit. The difference between those choices had reshaped an entire community. And it all started with a propane tank that no one noticed until someone tried to take it away. Sometimes the most important things are the ones we overlook until they are threatened. Then we discover what they really mean and what we are willing to do to protect them. For me, that discovery had led to uncovering fraud, reforming governance, and finding my place in a community I had only just joined. Not bad for 6 months of homeownership in a place I had inherited almost by accident. My uncle would have appreciated the irony. He had left me a house, a propane tank, and a legacy of community service. I had almost lost the tank but gained so much more in the fight to keep it. The propane tank behind my house continued its quiet work. The community center stayed warm. The neighborhood thrived. And I learned that sometimes the smallest acts of standing up for what is right can have the biggest impacts. That was the story of how an HOA tried to ban my propane tank without realizing it supplied their entire backup heating system. But more than that, it was the story of how a community confronted corruption, demanded accountability, and rebuilt trust. It was a story about the difference between power and service, between exploitation and contribution, between self-interest and community benefit. And it all started with a knock on my door on a cold February morning and a woman with a clipboard who thought she could push me around for profit. She was wrong. The propane tank stayed. The corrupt president went to jail. The community healed. And I found my purpose in a place I had never expected to call home.